I think wanting to know what's inside of something, how it works, and how you can make it do things, and we typically think of it as a technology thing, but I don't really think it is.
That was network engineer Mark Newton and his definition of what makes a geek a geek. I'm James Purser, and this is Purser Explores the World. Well, we're back for another year of exploration. This year I've promised myself that come hell or high water, there will be a full season of the show. That's 26 episodes of exploration to come. Our first episode of the year was inspired by a discussion on the tweeters between two of the people I'm chatting with tonight. Roving tech journalist, in the good sense, and host of the Patch Monday and the Edict podcast, Stilgarian, and network engineer Mark Newton. They were discussing an article that proclaimed that the World Wide Web as we knew it was going to die, that geeks would become an endangered species as the web was replaced by apps, and the days of hacking around were consigned to the past. To be honest, the article was pretty much pure hyperbole. However, it and the discussion between Still and Mark did trigger a thought. What would tomorrow's geek be playing with? With that in mind, I reached out to Mark, Stilgarian and Liz Quilty, three people who definitely qualify as geeks, to see where they thought the geeks of tomorrow would be digging around. The first person in the box is network engineer and pilot extraordinaire Mark Newton, explaining how he came to realise that he was in fact a geek.
I'm not sure it was ever a realization as such. It was just kind of easing into it almost as long as I can remember. I had a teacher that helped me get into it back in early primary school. And he was a geek himself. I don't know if you want to Google it. There's an old kit computer as a 8-bit system with a 6502 processor called a Ohio Scientific. That's it. A single board computer, and you'd spend a few weeks sort of assembling it, soldering it all together, and plug it into a TV and a cassette recorder, and you had a computer. He'd built one of them and then brought it into school and had absolutely no idea what to do with it. But a few of us sort of took a liking to it, and that's where I started getting into programming, and that probably opened the door to what we would now call geekery in general, I think.
How would you define a geek in the first place?
It's a self-definition thing, really, isn't it? I think wanting to know what's inside of something, how it works, and how you can make it do things, and we typically think of it as a technology thing, but I don't really think it is. I went to Melbourne on a holiday over the Christmas break, and my partner and I went on Puffing Billy, and the thing that occurred to me then was that the locomotives on that historical railway have been lovingly restored by people you can only describe as steam engine geeks. It's not really a technology specific thing. It's just a desire to go deep inside something, work out how to pull it apart, then put it back together again, and make it do interesting things.
So it's more of a personality type than a specific area.
Yeah, and I think that's been recognised a lot. People, I think, who are heavily into geekdom tend to be mildly autistic, and there's this whole mystique about how they're antisocial and obsessive and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think it's more personality than technology.
In the time, I mean, as you said, you started out with basically a computer that you had to solder to put together. Since then, things have advanced a bit. Just a little. Well, my first computer was an Apple IIe. I was 5 at the time. But since then, we've got an Apple IIe, Commodore, PCs, laptops, tablets, phones, and so on. And that sort of thing has sort of widened the acceptance of geekery in some way.
Well, it's widened the acceptance of the particular kind of geekery that is associated with computers as computers become more mainstream. Like the stuff that are teenager would do now on their smartphone when I was growing up would have been, all the people older than me would be going, oh, I don't understand any of that. And that, I mean, they still do it now. My mother looks at my niece who's 4 years old playing on an iPad and goes, oh, she's a lot cleverer than I am. I could never do anything like that. And it's just because technology is more accepted in each new generation that comes along than it was in the previous generation. Going back to the steam engine analogy, there would have been people back then going, oh, wonders of modern technology, while all these steam engines are tearing around the countryside replacing horses and carriages. So
Shank's mare was good enough for me in my day.
Yes, that's right. Get off my lawn.
Yeah. Get it off my lawn.
Yeah, so I think as the technology becomes more mainstream, the geekery that is associated with that form of technology stops being looked at as unusual, but then new forms of geekery will be. So you have to project things forward a little bit and work out what's coming next to work out who's going to be perceived as the antisocial loners next.
Well, that's what I'd like to do in this episode. I mean, we've gotten to the point now where the stuff, as you said, the stuff that we were doing, well, you were doing or I were doing 20 years ago on our computers, we were connecting up to GopherNet. We were sorting out all this wonderful stuff. The internet was just starting. This was before dub. But now we're at the point where that is part of everyday life. So what's going to be like for, say, my kids if they get into geekery? What will be their focuses? What will be those brand new areas that they can hack around on?
It'll be whatever is on the bleeding edge when they are growing up. Like I used to joke about how I feared for the future of the computer world when the operating systems that future generations use would be written by people who had never used a C compiler without a GUI, because you look back at how Unix was developed, and it was all on ASR 33 teletypes and rolls of paper, and then oh god, these glass TTYs came on, and wasn't that wondrous technology? But
more than one person could use a computer on a day.
Oh yeah, you just have two teletypes. So as the bleeding edge advances, whoever's interested in that minuscule facet of what we associate as technology is inevitably going to be perceived as a geek, and will probably self-identify as such.
Now, you're not just a computer geek; you're a pilot as well. You like to fly.
There are vast, endless vistas of technological obsession associated with flying. Absolutely.
So, in that regard, can you see? I mean, would you call yourself a flying geek?
Very much so.
So, what is it that attracts you about that?
It works on a lot of levels. I mean, flying for a start's very tactile. It's different from anything else that you would normally do. You really have to get involved in the feeling of it, and when you do that, you really feel like you've mastered it. And it's always good to feel like you're mastering something, whether it's writing iOS applications or flying a plane. The sense of satisfaction that you get from being good at something is good. And I'm not saying I am good at these things, but occasionally I pull off a good landing and walk away from it going, oh, that was nice.
And it must be said that an iOS application crashing is a lot less deadly than a plane crash?
Yes. It depends on how you do it, I guess. And there's also a lot of technical dimension to it. Flying is essentially applied physics, and there's a lot of mathematics associated with it. There's a lot of theory, and you can pick the difference between people who dabble with it and people who are really going into it boots and all by looking at how much of that they know and how they can apply it to their actual flying, and in that sense it's a little bit like something like programming or building networks as well. It's possible to get a lot more obsessive about it than I am. And I think that's an important dimension that, as long as we're talking about geekery, I think any field that a geek will turn themselves to needs to probably have some degree of specialization, but also a lot of depth to it. If you can't go deep into it, you'll get bored and then move on to the next thing, and you won't really be geeking out in that particular field anymore.
In the discussion that we had that followed the launch of the pointing out of that article, you and Stilgarian were speaking about the fact that cars had become basically commoditized. It used to be 30 years ago that you had an engine, you could get in there, you could tinker around with it, you could do whatever you like with it. But nowadays, everything's compartmentalized. You just take out a bit, put a bit in, the computers control everything, and so on. So it becomes a lot harder to be a car geek, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I won't even change the oil on my Subaru now. But then I think, like, you might remember there was a show on ABC years ago called Bush Mechanics. It was like 4 or 5 programs in a series about people in outback communities who would drive these cars around and just keep them going no matter what. And I don't think you can do that with a modern car. If you took a modern Commodore out into the middle of nowhere, and then bits of it falling apart, and I was going to say the carbies stopped working, but they don't have carbies, do they? Like, how would you do that with a modern car? So, as you get advancement in the state of the art, you end up with something that's monstrously more useful than what came before it. But I think you also lose a little bit as well.
So, are you seeing that sort of thing in aircraft as well? Are they doing the same sort of commoditization?
They're trying to. One of the issues in aviation at the moment that they're trying to get away from is the fuels that are used for various reasons. And it would be desirable to have aircraft that were either running on alternative fuels or no fuels at all because they were full of batteries. Mm-hmm. So there are lots of areas of technological advancement happening there. Believe it or not, in the gliding world, more than a lot of other parts of aviation, because gliding tends to be a lot more experimental. You end up with gliders flying around with the wings full of lithium batteries, which doesn't strike me as great in a fire, but I guess gliders don't catch fire very often.
Okay, why do they, just out of curiosity, gliders don't actually have any form of propulsion?
Oh, motor gliders do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and about probably at least half of the gliders that are sold these days have some sort of self-launching or sustaining capability, because people don't like landing in paddocks. So you might go off on a 500 kilometre or a 750 kilometre cross country, and you don't really want to land in a paddock in the middle of nowhere 300 kilometres from home. So you have a small sort of 10 or 15 horsepower engine on the back, almost like it comes out of the back of the glider, James Bond style, with a little propeller on it, and it'll
just
get
a little
home.
Pusher.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool. So, but those are the sort of areas that you're talking about when it comes to geekery, that bleeding edge sort of stuff. Yes,
that's right. And it's not just electric motors and small engines. I've got a mate who lives at Waikerie who's taken. God, it's like car modification. Where you get an old bomb, then you restore it and put a massive supercharged engine in it, and it goes at 300 kilometers per hour or something. He's taken a fairly old glider and then done enough surgery on it to put 3 jet turbine engines on it.
You know what? My dad did that once with a model glider.
This is a real one. It makes the most amazing noise. It's just brilliant.
See, what happened, just apropos of nothing, my dad and I used to have a couple of remote control planes. One was a line fly-by-wire thing, which ended up getting nosedived into the ground about 3 flights in.
Yes.
So he took the motor from that, counterweighted the glider, and stuck the motor on the front of the glider. It flew. I don't think we got it back.
Yes, that happens often. I've got a battery-powered helicopter that I'm far better at crashing than flying.
But see, so he's just stuck a couple of 3 jet engines on his glider.
Yeah, if you look on YouTube, there are some really large model aircraft that have jet engines in them. The jet engines, they're about 150 millimeters in diameter, and they put out about 25-30 kilos of thrust. So he's got 3 of them, which is enough to get him as self-launching with 1 engine worth of redundancy. So if he has an engine failure, he can keep climbing.
Sweet.
It's like I said, it makes the most amazing noise.
I bet it would. But that's a perfect example of a geek.
It is, and he's had to do a lot of, well, all of the work himself. Like he's built this control system to retract the engines into the fuselage when he's not using them, and the throttle system he's taken, or the engine control system he's built out of microcontrollers and spare stereo parts. His throttle control, because it's all microcontroller controlled, no moving parts. His throttle control is an actual volume knob from a stereo system, so it actually has a loud knob. You can turn
Can
the
he
volume
turn it up to 11?
Absolutely.
Just play it loud, okay?
and it's I guess another example of the obsessiveness that we've been talking about. He worked on it for years. Like no one ever thought he was going to get it finished until he started doing his first flights a couple of years ago.
Does he have any YouTube video of this?
Maybe. I have some photos of the engine test day that I can send you.
I was just thinking of anything that I could link to, because I'm pretty sure
Yeah,
that the listeners are probably going, I want to see this.
Yeah, I'll send you some pics of the engine test day. I'm not sure if I have any video. I might be able to find some.
So could it be safe to say that you don't despair for tomorrow's Geek then?
No, there'll always be something else.
So good. I mean, and that's the thing. A geek will always find something that interests him or herself.
Exactly, and I think it's all about avoiding boredom. You spend long enough doing the mundane stuff that it ceases to hold any attraction, so you move on to the next best thing. And it used to be that the next best thing was, fiddling around with 8-bit processors and soldering irons, and these days it's moved on to things that we would now call modern, that weren't even thought about 20 years ago.
Just in case you're wondering, Mark was able to supply me with links to photos and a YouTube video of the jet-enabled glider that he mentioned during the interview. I'd turn it up to 11. That thing is loud. Right, next up is Liz Quilty. Liz is a systems administrator at Remu Hosting, and she's based out of New Zealand. And she's also one of the better sources of geekery to be found on Google+. We're going to join Liz as she explains how she came to geekery a little later than a lot of us.
I don't know. I started chatting online, on IRC no less, which was kind of the internet relay chat of the old days. And I didn't know how to do things, so I asked. And then eventually how was it? Then basically people didn't know how to do things, so they asked and I answered because I'd learned it. And then they started asking me things I didn't know, and so I would search it up and figure it out and then tell them. And then, people just assume you know stuff, so they just ask you and you just Google it, and it just went from there. So it's kind of self-taught for a lot of it. And I got into Linux within about 9 months of a year of being in the internet, and just went from there.
Now, were you a teenager or a kid when you started, or did you start a bit later?
No, I was about 25, it must have been 26, 27 even.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I wasn't young for sure. But I mean, I wasn't old, I suppose, either. But I was definitely older than probably a lot of the young people who get into stuff, I suppose.
What attracted you to it at that time? I mean, you were 26 years old. This is something new for you.
I was a high school dropout. So I had no qualifications or anything like that. And for me, it was just a way of getting away from the kids, because I was a solo parent at home, and being able to socialize with people. And then from there, it was quite flattering, I suppose, that people assumed that you knew stuff and you were smart. And I guess online it was very different, because in real life, the people, I guess, that I hung out with, probably losers and stuff, it was cool to be a loser and to go out drinking and to do stuff. Whereas online, it was actually cool to be smart. And that whole, to be a smart person, oh yeah, he's a geek, really smart, it was quite flattering, I suppose. So for me, it was quite flattering. I quite enjoyed that, the mental challenge of being able to figure things out and work things out.
What was the community like for you?
Oh, it was pretty good, actually. Everyone was really good. I got a little more attention being a female. Not always good attention. They always assume that the worst as well. But, it was quite good, though. I guess it makes it a lot easier in respect of being known easily. Because people remember you because, obviously you're a female. But people are always helpful, though. I tell you that, guys are always helpful, trying to help you if you ask them something. So, that was quite good.
you're now a bastard operator from hell, or an Uber sysadmin for Remu hosting. Your geekery is not restricted to computers. You hack around with stuff, but you're not only just into computers, are you?
I like just to figure out how things work. I guess it's kind of gone from computers to everything else. So I often just pull things apart and try and figure out how they work. And I'm one of those people who just sit there and I'll Wikipedia and you think about how does that work? That's always fascinated me. And then I'll just end up in those Wikipedia loops where you just kind of look at all these obscure articles and end up with bunches of trivia. But I mean, I pull other things apart and put things together, and I do a bit of woodworking as well, and pretty much anything. Yeah.
But you make your own ukuleles. It's not just woodwork. You're actually making instruments, aren't you?
Yeah, well, they couldn't afford to buy one. They cost about $600 or $700 upwards for a good quality solid wood, something different. So I thought, oh yeah, how hard can it be? But it would. Googled that one, made some ukuleles as well. It wasn't too hard actually, surprisingly. Finicky, fun, but not overly hard. It is a bit of geeky in science, I suppose, because it's all about the woods. You're using the right woods for the right tone woods and the right thickness and all sorts of other things. But
the topic of this podcast is tomorrow's geek. You're actually raising a couple of your own, aren't you?
I have 3 children, but I've never really pushed them into geekery as such because I don't want to live vicariously through my children. I want them to choose what they want to do, which is probably quite different to a lot of people who, because we're a 2 geek family, both parents work and do the same thing, and we're pretty high-end geeks, but we've never really pushed the kids to do anything. I mean, they all use Linux, but they really don't know much other than the basics of, using the UI and a little bit of console stuff, I suppose.
But I've found, with being a 2 geek family, that there's your kids have more of an interest in actually exploring stuff.
Surprisingly, not always, no. But they do find, like, my oldest daughter's, she's quite a smart, she's very intellectual, and she's like, oh, how did you do that? That's really cool. She wants to have it set up an auto tweet. I said, oh, I wrote this, here's a shell script that just opens this file with text file and does all that. And, she's got a Dropbox where she just dumps a text file now of quotes and auto tweets on her Twitter. And she has used the console a little bit, and she knows how to use SSH, and she's found it quite fascinating, but we've never really pushed her into it. But she just says, oh, using the package manager just takes a while to load things, but if I use the command line, it's a little bit quicker. So
she's finding her own way.
Yeah. I mean, I just give them what they ask for. I don't push them into it. So yeah, if they ask how to do something, I'll show them, but I'm not going to go out of my way and push my beliefs or my preferences onto them. Interestingly, though, they do come up with some interesting stuff. They'll go onto websites where you can do theming, and they'll start off with someone else will say, here's a theme, and they'll copy paste code, not knowing actually what the code is. And it's just HTML and CSS. But from there, they start editing it, and because they find they can tweak stuff. So they do get away with doing stuff that's quite geeky without realizing quite what they're doing, I think.
Now, because you're a person who likes to explore, you're a person who likes to, you start out on one page on Wikipedia, and the next thing you're learning about 13th century Lithuania.
Yeah.
We're looking at tomorrow, what geeks of tomorrow are going to be into, because computers nowadays, I mean, a PC or a laptop, they're pretty much becoming just basically buy the box and away you go. Or they're moving to tablets, which are even harder for people to really get into and start mucking about with.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the geek of tomorrow will be playing with?
Well, I think there's still, I mean, from what I can see, I mean, back in the day, it would be, you had to kind of know a lot more low-level stuff, like hardware. You had to muck around with hardware quite a bit, and you had to know quite a bit to get it going, and writing drivers and stuff. But a lot of that's automated now. You don't really need to do that. However, there is still stuff which is equally geeky, which people are still doing now. I talked to a couple of kids at the high school, and they're still like flashing ROMs on their devices and trying different ones. And whilst it's not so much technical, then they start fiddling with the files that they're flashing and start editing those configs and start mucking around with that. And that's just your average kid. That's just, that's not necessarily even a geek. I think the fact that they've been raised on the internet, they're more inclined to fiddle with things without being scared, whereas the older generation tend to be a little bit more hesitant about some things. I guess, I don't want to break it, so I won't touch it type thing, or I don't want to brick my phone. Whereas younger kids don't really have that so much than they wreck things. But they also figure things out.
Well, they're good like that, aren't they? I mean, their kids are good at exploring things in the first place.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's the natural curiosity, isn't it, of fiddling with things.
I should say that Liz was gracious enough to interrupt her viewing of the last 2 episodes of The Fringe to chat with me, so thanks, Liz. Now, last but by no means least, we have Stilgarian. I have to say that I was almost tempted to spin this interview into a separate show, both for the length and for the ground we covered. However, I'm not going to. Instead, here he is, Stilgarian, explaining how he started on his particular path to geekdom.
Look, I've never quite worked out when that moment of self-discovery was, but I could see that I was interested in this stuff from a very early age, looking back. I recently, a couple of years ago, wrote some blog posts about my childhood, and I was a huge fan of the space program, to the point where the people who went to school, primary school with me, were sort of saying, wow, you could actually draw like scale pictures of all of the space vehicles. You could identify them at primary school age. I think I even named the farm cats after spacecraft. It was that kind of level. So you're talking when I was, sub 10 years old. And then there seemed to be a natural path from there into being interested in railways, because until we got the internet, I suppose, railways were the kind of most complicated visible thing that you could see that involved organisation. You had timetabling, signalling, safety engineering, all sorts of stuff. And in those days, you were kind of, well, this was in the country, but you could walk around railway stations and walk down the tracks and see how it all worked. And then when it was computers, you've got to remember that, I'm a man of a certain age now, and my introduction to computers was at the very end of secondary school, where there was a thing in Adelaide called, what was it called? I can't even remember. But there was a computer facility that the education department had set up that selected final year students could go and visit, and they had an IBM System 360 mainframe. And it was the Angle Park Computing Centre, I remember now, and you could go there on the weekends and hang around, and you could program this thing in BASIC or APL, and you did so not with punch cards, because that would have required having a lot of punch card machines, but with optical mark cards. So they were like the 80-column punch cards, but you sort of filled them in with a pen to blacken out the dots. And that meant you could write your programs on your punch cards at home during the week and bring them in on Saturday to run them.
Cool. I'm just trying to imagine being able to it's basically like handwriting your programs and then having the computer process them.
Well, that's right. But that was batch processing. That's how computers worked. And even then, when I started at Adelaide University in the end of the 70s, I can't remember which year it was now, but only post-grad computing science students got to use the interactive terminals. Everyone else was writing their programs for their class exercise using punch cards in batch mode. So, anyone under about the age of 40, I suppose, or maybe 30, will find this a little bit hard to comprehend. The idea that you would write a program and then you would take like your big box full of punch cards and hand it through the hatch to the little man who accepted the job, and then 45 minutes to an hour later, your box would be returned to you along with a paper printout, and that would inform you that on line 275 of your program you were missing a semicolon, so it didn't compile.
And I complain about the 2 minutes it takes me to get an error message back when I try and compile an Android app.
That's right. And there are some programmers of a certain age who think that modern programming styles are essentially lazy, because we were taught to write to optimize for the computer's resources. Now you optimize for programmer time because computers are cheap and programmers are expensive.
So we're talking the get off my lawn theory of programming.
I think there's going to be a lot of get off this lawn in this conversation. Absolutely.
All right, so you discovered your geekness and your inherent love for this sort of stuff, and you've made essentially something of a living out of it, haven't you?
Well, yes, I was actually, running a small business doing network management and other things for a while. But now, yes, I'm a writer, journalist, commentator, podcaster, etc., covering how the internet and other emerging technologies are changing the world. And what I find interesting about this is that it's fundamentally changing human society. And I know everybody who talks about future stuff says that we're going through a fundamental change, but we are. Do you want me to do the standard 3 or 4 ages of civilization thing?
No, I think we're actually at the point now where most people recognise that the internet has changed the way we work. Well, at least Western society does.
Yeah, and the third world is as well. I mean, when you see villages that have no electricity and no running water, and yet the village elders have a cheap Chinese cell phone which they use to send SMS messages to, negotiate where they're going to sell their bananas, which town, so they get the best price. Oh yeah, it's changing everything. But I think something that fascinates me about it is that there's a line of logic which says all of this digital and mobile technology is changing the information plumbing of the planet. Information flows in different kinds of ways. Information generates knowledge. Knowledge is power. So if we're replumbing the entire knowledge infrastructure of the planet, that means we're replumbing the power structures as well. And that, to me, is the common thread that runs through everything from there are hackers on the internet and us poor police officers don't know how to deal with it, to I'm Jerry Harvey and they're ruining my stores because people can buy cheaper stuff on the internet. It's like, well, yes, correct. That's what it's for. And even between parents and kids. And we see that particularly as mostly the parental generation did not grow up using the internet, but now the kids' generation is. So there's a generation gap and a half in there. So that's the bit I find fascinating.
And going back to that informational rewiring that you're talking about, that's been accelerating over the last, say, 20 years, from what I can see. Geek culture and, say, normal culture, I'm using air quotes here just in case anybody's offended.
I can see your fingers in the air.
Oh, there we go. They're merging to some extent.
Well, yes and no. I mean, if you used a computer 20 years ago, that was the mark of being a geek. If you use a computer today, you're just a member of the human race. They're not a special thing that special people use. Everyone has them for some value of everyone. I think what's happened is that the tools themselves, and let's say computers is the example, you used to have specialist knowledge or at least a certain mindset to put up with the unreliable pieces of crap. Whereas now, computers work perfectly. Where am I going with this argument? But really what's happened over the past 20 years has been the commodification of computers, that they're things you buy in stores, and you buy them not by feature sets that talk about processor speed and things, but it's about style and brand. And that means they've become a consumer purchase, not a specialist technical purpose. And that's been made possible simply because a lot of the workings of it have been hidden away.
True. I mean, they've been simplified something chronic. I mean, we're now at the point where desktops and laptops are being replaced by things like tablets.
Absolutely. And 2-year-olds pick up a tablet computer and just start using it. They're going to be screwed when they have to type.
Well, my kids, I mean, they can use a tablet. We've got an iPad and we've got a Zoom, and they adapted to it quite well.
Well, that's right, because we are hardwired to manipulate the physical world around us. I mean, what is the first movement babies make in the clutch, in the cots? They're reaching out with their hands and pawing at things to explore the world around them. They don't get language for years after that. and let alone written language and the idea that you can assemble words by typing them on a machine called a keyboard. I mean, that's a vastly complicated way of doing things. Even moving things indirectly with a mouse, is harder than just grabbing what you see on the screen and moving it. There's a fascinating video that someone on the internet put up, but it showed their young child, about 18 months or something, who was flicking through the pages of an iPad magazine. Then they handed them a printed magazine on paper, and the kid tries to, turn the pages just by swiping his hand across it and then getting frustrated because the magazine's broken. It's not turning the pages.
Okay, so we've got to this point now where society has become essentially merged with computers. They know the computers are now part of everyday life. We work with them every day. We carry them around in our pocket. We read on them. We play games and so on and so forth. So that element of geekery is, now being normalized, if that's the correct word.
Yeah, I think the key element here is that the geekery aspect is understanding of the systems. It's the curiosity about exploring the systems. And most people using a smartphone in their pocket, they're not interested in how it works or how they can change it. They just want to use it to, organise their party on Facebook and pick up men on Grindr.
So where does it leave the geek now? I mean, the geek going forward...
I mean, the geeks have still got really highly paid jobs making all this stuff. We're in the second .com boom now. These guys are getting paid boatloads of money.
Are they?
Well, there's a worldwide shortage of decent web developers. for a year or two, maybe.
Yeah, until the next lot come out from...
Well, no, you see, because the courses aren't teaching current stuff. The technology advances faster than the courses can create, if you like, the tradespeople. And I think there's really two species of geekery when you talk at the programmer level. There are the computing scientists, and then there are people who do IT. So it's really the science and then the engineering, I suppose, software engineering, and then there's the tradecraft. It's most people doing stuff with IT really are doing tradespeople jobs. They're data plumbers. They learn procedures for configuring a Microsoft file server. But you ask them to create a new kind of file-serving architecture, they wouldn't know where to start. That's the science aspect. And they've always been in the minority. So the really innovative programmers doing magical new things with internet startups aren't tradespeople coders making, yet another accounting system for a large organisation. They're trying to genuinely invent new ways of doing things. And that's a rare skill. That's true geekery. Someone who comes to fix your printer on level 4 of the office, they're not a geek. They're just a kind of mechanic kind of thing.
So the difference would be, say, somebody who plays games on the weekends and somebody who grabs a Raspberry Pi and starts building, say, an internet-enabled light.
Yeah, look, these are the things. That's geekery. That's recombining elements to make new things. And at the opposite end of that spectrum, you have people saying, "Oh, I'm a geek," and I go, "No, you just like proving how cool you are by downloading the latest app for your iPhone." But you're really just a consumer, going after the latest shiny thing. I like to think that everyone lining up to get the latest MacBook Pro from outside an Apple store, you're not. You're consumerist puppets. You don't need that thing today.
So that is something that has changed.
Get off the lawn.
Yeah, get off the lawn. That's something that has changed, though. This idea that geek cred is something that people want now.
Kind of. You're right. There is a cool factor about having the latest shiny thing, but in a way, that's also the cool factor of buying a Porsche to drive. That doesn't make you a mechanic.
The article that inspired this whole show talks about the death of the interwebs. The
interwebs are totally dead. No one does anything there.
Yeah, look, we're all going to stop using the internet. We're not going to browse anymore. It's all going to be apps, and geeks are going to die off.
No. The geeks are just going to go to somewhere where there is more need for and possibility of thinking up new things to do and being creative. Once you get to the point of, I suppose, having a laptop computer, for example, got one sitting in front of me. Once you've kind of got the general principles there and the form factors and the interfaces done, the rest of it's just product engineering, and that's not as interesting. We just want to make the screen a bit brighter, or we want to make the power consumption a bit better. That's kind of straightforward engineering work, and I don't mean to say engineers aren't geeks, but they're a different kind of geek, and I suppose lumping those people together under one label, geeks, and then fans of the TV series Glee become gleeks. I mean, just I know. I mean, they should really just be rounded up and shot. But being geekery is not just about being an enthusiast. It's about being a creator and an innovator. Well, an innovator is a very strong and loaded word, but someone who explores and creates, say. So if we find that people aren't having as much fun creating stuff that appears on the screen of their smartphone, and I actually contend that that's not the case. I'll come back to that in a second. But there's all sorts of other areas of emerging technology which have the same kind of hobbyist experimenter thing that we had in the 1970s that fueled the personal computer revolution, so that then in 1982 we had the IBM PC, in 1984 the Mac. He says, completely kind of shortcutting the entire history of personal computing. So what we've got now, we've got 3D printing, where you can design and print stuff across the internet. And the one that I think is a sleeper is genetic engineering, because DNA sequences are now cheap devices. You can there's all sorts of services where you send them the data file which describes the DNA sequence you want, and they'll send you back a file full of it.
So you're talking about DNA geeks, basically genetic hackers.
Yep, absolutely. And I have no idea where they might go with that. I mean, purple-haired cats or frogs with 6 legs is one direction.
Glow-in-the-dark mice.
Glow-in-the-dark mice we already have on the market. Or is it fish? Glow-in-the-dark fish are already on sale. There are some who might tinker around with it for medical purposes. There's others for, weaponizing the stuff. Fashion, maybe you want all your kids to have bright blue eyes and blonde hair because you thought that Mr. Hitler was a nice chap. He didn't have blonde hair, though, himself.
And he was half Jewish.
Yeah, well, the world's a funny place. But I don't know. We have, in the last year or two, someone created the first purely synthetic life form, that they just worked out from first principles what all the replicator elements would need and do it. And they just produced the gene sequence out of raw materials, and it's a replicating thing. It's kind of a stripped down, single cell thing. I don't know that it actually does much, and it probably couldn't survive in the wild, but at least it can eat and reproduce, and that's really all we want to do.
Just like a lot of people, really.
So that's if you want to talk about being at the very leading edge of something that'll be interesting, that's there.
Sounds like a topic for a new show.
That's right. And drones. For a couple $100, you get your computer-controlled helicopters that take vision and think, oh, look, there's all sorts of stuff that happen here. Here's one that I think you could do. If you want to do TV sports coverage of the local under-19s hockey club, then you buy yourself half a dozen of the drones with the camera on them. You get some sort of software that can track the ball or shots or program them up. And beam that to the internet. I reckon it won't be far away before we have people doing this as their own private little TV thing.
I came across the other day at Big W basically my first drone.
My first drone.
Yeah, I took a picture of it. It's $88. It's a little.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's a little remote control plane that you charge it for your USB port. Has a camera in it, and it films as it flies.
Yep. And That's going to be fascinating because technically you're meant to have a permit to fly any sort of remotely. Oh no, that's unpiloted aircraft, but
Yeah.
they're starting to develop that. This kind of stuff's really some interesting geekery can happen there. There are already some robot aircraft doing fascinating things with agricultural uses, because instead of sending an aircraft across to dump pesticides and weedicides over your entire farm, you actually have the plane fly around through a set course to track its way over the farm. Its image sensors tell it where the soil needs the fertilizer or where the colour of the vegetation indicates that there are weeds, and it fires a little targeted spray of the necessary stuff in just that spot.
As you can see, we roved far and wide. I think Still's suggestion of a future community of DNA hacking geeks is both scary and awesome at the same time. Think about it, the Linux operating system grew out of the frustrations of a single geek to become a vital plank of our networked world. The mind boggles at what could grow from a group of frustrated DNA hackers. Glow-in-the-dark goldfish is one thing. 3 arms so that you can attack 3 different keyboards at the same time, that's another. I think the best message we can take away from these 3 interviews is that the idea of geekdom is itself under absolutely no threat. Tomorrow's geeks are going to be around obsessing about their passions, building new stuff and completely disrupting the world around them. They're just going to be doing it using different tools and in different areas that we grow up with. Okay, that was episode 13 of Purser Explores the World, the first for 2013. You will hear from me again in 2 weeks' time for the next episode. And don't forget, you can follow Angry Beanie on Twitter, Facebook and Google+, where we actually have a community as well as a page. So why don't you join us for the discussion?